All right, welcome everybody to another episode 1071, Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you for everyone out there who is listening to the show, watching, however you consume Talking Buffalo. Appreciate you guys very much. If you're not yet followed, please make sure that you're doing so, especially on the audio side. Spotify, Apple really helps us continue to grow the show. Big shout out to the sponsors, Imperial Pizza, 1035 Aber Road, and of course, Sunny Reds, 1841 Aber Road, just down the way from Highmark Stadium. Appreciate both those spots. Great places to go, hang out, eat, enjoy a good meal, have a good time. All right, guys, this is our Tuesday episode. I'm joined right now for a mostly hockey-centric episode of Talking Buffalo. My guy, Chris Ostrander from Two in the Box, buddy. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Not too bad. Trying to enjoy some sunshine before this rain hits, but not so bad. How are you?
It's been pretty good, man. It's turned a little bit. I mean, I feel like every time I've had you on over the last couple months, it's been shitty out, and I've been whining and bitching and moaning about the weather. So it's despite some rain coming here this week, it's been really nice. It's been really cool. I got a lot of hockey stuff I want to get to today. It's one of the. I always like talking to you regardless, but lots of things going on with the Sabres, which is weird to say because they're not playing hockey and they haven't played hockey in quite a long time. But some JJ Peterka stuff that I want to talk about. I want to talk about their new senior advisor hiring, which you wrote about in your blog. I want to touch on that as well. Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic posted a really interesting article last week about the organization kind of being stuck in a hamster wheel, just going in circles. I had Matt on the show last week to discuss that. A lot of fun. I want to get your thoughts on that. A former Buffalo Sabres social media manager wrote an interesting, I think I could call it like kind of a rebuttal to what Matt says. I want to talk about that with you a little bit as well. And then, look, desperation mode needs to be activated for this hockey team right now at this point, and kind of pick your brain a little bit there too on what they might be up to here in the coming weeks. So where the hell do we begin? Let's start with JJ Peterka, okay? Because he's an interesting name, and I saw that Friedman on his podcast was he talked about him a little bit, and the latest that he said is that there's no indication that the Sabres are trading JJ Peterka. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. What are your thoughts on that? Is it something you think could happen? Is it something you think should happen? If you are Kevyn Adams and Terry Bagula right now, how are you approaching JJ Peterka?
So I think, Friedman gave a really important piece of context saying that it's agent-driven. And Peterka's agent is Alan Walsh. He's very famous for being forthright and very forceful and like negotiating through the media and putting clients' names out there. So, I would go so far to say, like, I wouldn't be shocked if the Peterka to the Rangers rumors at the deadline, if they came from him. If he was trying to cook up a little bit of rumor on Peterka to get more attention on him. So I think that's important context because, I heard, I don't know who was on the weekend show on GR, but they were talking about potential for an offer sheet, and that's been floated here and there. But given Peterka's status, an offer sheet, I think, is a very, very, very unlikely outcome because outside of a huge overpay, like an example I would give, like the Vanek, 4 first-round pick compensation overpay, they're just doing the work for the Sabres. If someone's giving them term and a decent enough cap hit, never say never, but I would have to think that any offer sheet the Sabres are matching and saying thanks for negotiating for us. So the Peterka thing also is, in my mind, is driven by the fact that he has become a proven effective goal scorer. You're going to probably be able to count on him for 25, 30 goals. He is a very comfortable, effective asset to them in their top 6. And so that's a piece, and he's homegrown too, right? Draft pick. So he's a guy that you would under almost every circumstance want to hold on to and want to extend. So I have a hard time imagining he's getting traded unless he's getting put into a trade package for a significant upgrade. And whether that's at forward or defense, you could flip a coin there. But I think short of a huge blockbuster type trade, I would assume that you're going to see JJ Peterka in a Sabres uniform come fall.
Do you would you have any buyers beware with him? Although not specifically him. Here's what I'm getting at here. The Sabres, the long-term extensions that they've done, I feel like it's kind of been a mixed bag. Like Rasmus Dahlin is fine value. I mean, you're paying a lot of money for him, but man, he's one of the best defensive players in the NHL. That's what you do, right? Tage Thompson is starting to feel like a bargain right now more and more to me, But then conversely, I mean, Dylan Cousins ended up being a terrible contract. They traded him, but, that was a bad contract. And for now, at least as we record this, they're stuck with a long-term deal with Samuelsson that they did. So they've kind of had a mixed bag with some of these, let's get our young core and lock them up long-term. Does anything that's happened in the past, if your management, does that give you any pause whatsoever? If you're thinking about trying to say, you know what, I want JJ Peterka here for the next 4 to 7 years?
I'm sure that's probably in the back of their mind somehow. The one thing I think that probably differentiates him from those guys where you're a little bit more concerned about giving the early extension, Samuelsson and Cousins being two good examples, was that they got those extensions after 1 year or even less of
Right.
good play. And Peterka, now you've got 2 years in the bank, 2 really good years, in addition to a really nice season in Rochester and just overall a good trajectory. So I think you'd probably feel a little bit safer with him. And, his offense this year was terrific. I know his defense kind of took a step back, but maybe it was a little bit of a contract year thing of him just, pushing offense the whole time. You never know. And then similarly last year, that breakout year that he had, he was just really good. He was a good player for them, pretty consistent goal scorer overall. So I think you have enough of a resume now that you'd feel comfortable giving him term. And you wouldn't be looking at it like Cousins where he had a 31 goal season, he gets his extension, and then you turn around that next year is a down year for him, and you're wondering like, okay, like now we got to hope he rebounds. I think you have a little bit more to work with Peterka that you'd feel more confident at least in giving him that term.
Do you feel, and this is not, there's no insult whatsoever towards JJ Peterka, I want to be clear on that. What we saw this past year, is that his ceiling? You still think he's got room to grow into a better player? I mean, he scored 27 goals last year. You look at JJ Peterka 2 years from now in your crystal ball, and is that pretty much what you're getting? A guy who's going to score like 25 to maybe 32, 33 goals? Or do you think the ceiling's there for a little bit more? And even if it's not, like even if this is his ceiling, it feels like an effective enough production and player that he is worth that longer-term investment.
Yeah, that's a great question because, just looking at the counting stats, you could probably count on him to have a year where he really, really pops. Like Tuck did a couple years ago, Thompson with that really big year, even, where you're going to have those ebbs and flows, and he'll have a 36 goal season, and it'll be, he'll be going like gangbusters, and then he'll come back with a 27 goal season or something like that. But I think you can. Is this his ceiling? Is a hard one to answer. I would probably lean yes, because I don't know, is he going to be a consistent 35 plus guy? That's a little bit harder to say just because he's not great on the power play. And so he doesn't have that secondary option, that secondary source, I should say, for more goals. So you're really probably relying on his even strength production to get there. And he's already playing on their top line for the most part. He's, and so I would find it hard to imagine he'd be a 35 plus guy scoring, 30 goals every year at even strength. So I guess I would lean yes, but there's always room for growth. He's still a young player. There's still, there's certainly opportunity if he is indeed going to be on the first line with regularity or in the top 6 at the very least, which I think you can rely on. If he has a center that he gels with, and whether that's Thompson, if it's Kulik, if it's Norris, if it's someone else, there's certainly an opportunity for him to take another step. But generally speaking, yeah, I'd probably say like, yeah, you're at or close to it from a production standpoint.
Do you get a sense of what you think his financial ceiling may be in terms of like what his average annual salary could potentially max out at, whether it's Buffalo or some other team down the road?
That's another good one. It's funny because I probably still operate on the idea of like, he should be a five and like a five and a quarter type guy or something like that, which is
Hmm.
um is probably thinking from the mid teens, not quite the 2020s. Matt Coronado is a player. He's playing with Calgary. He just signed a 6 years, $6.5 million, or six and a quarter. Pretty sure 6.5 million. And he hasn't been quite as an explosive finisher as compared to Paterka. So, that you certainly probably add a healthy 500 grand, if not a million, to the cap hit right off the top. Um, I would probably feel pretty comfortable. Yeah. Paying, if you paid him somewhere between seven and a quarter and 7.5, 775, that's fine. I think you can live with that cap hit. That's going to look really affordable, I think, in a couple more years. You mentioned, Pat, you mentioned the Tage Thompson contract. That looks like a bargain now. He'd be making, if you made 7.5, he'd make like 400, if I'm not mistaken, more than Thompson does. And in 2 years, if the cap's at 105 million bucks, that's a pretty manageable cap hit. So I would have to think that's the neighborhood. Like sites like Evolving Hockey and other places that do contract projections might be projecting him at like 8. I'm not sure, but like I would feel comfortable if they were in the 7 range. That's my personal take.
Let's switch gears here and discuss the Sabres hiring of Jarmo Kekäläinen as senior advisor to Kevyn Adams. You wrote about it on in the blog. I got a link to that blog post in the show notes. It was a good one. What's your take on the move? What do you think he will bring to the table? I loved your headline, "An adult in the room" was part of your headline. It just felt really fitting and accurate. What are your thoughts on the Sabres making a move that I think some people, maybe not him specifically, but a senior advisor that people expected?
Yeah, the expected move, the one that people have been waiting for, right, for most of this offseason. And it was maybe looking a little touch and go there as the GM hirings were getting filled out. As it was like, okay, like, are they going to get someone? Is it going to be too late? Are they too close to the draft? And so I'm glad that they found someone. I'm glad they found someone with some pretty substantial experience. Kekäläinen's got 10 plus years as
Hmm.
GM of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He filled other roles in front offices in the NHL. So he has the sort of resume that you'd want in any senior role in a front office, whether it's general manager, the senior advisor, like a vice president position, you name it. And generally, it's a positive move. We'll see how it all shakes out. We'll see, you know, these guys, if these guys are all indeed on expiring contracts and the season doesn't go well. I know we've talked about this before, but if all these guys are out of a job come April, does Kekäläinen step into the GM role? Is he out with everybody else? Is this just all one huge regime change? So that's kind of the big TBD of, how does this season go and how does he factor into it? Is he looked at as a potential heir apparent, or is he just looked at as another member of the staff? My biggest take on this is what I wrote about in the blog, is whether or not he has the muscle to make real influence on their moves.
Hmm.
And we're never going to know that. We might get some tidbits of it from Beyond Blue and Gold videos and stuff like that. But the big thing on Kekäläinen is that he's got brass ones, right? Like he's not afraid to make a big move. He wants to be aggressive. That's what is very much of his MO was in Columbus. But as a senior advisor sitting behind Kevyn Adams and reporting to Kevyn Adams, is he going to have that latitude? Is he going to be able to go and even, maybe even try to work deals for Adams? If Adams says, hey, you have a connection with Ken Holland, can you go work a deal with him? Or you have a connection with Chris Drury, can you chat with him and see what what the thoughts are? Or is it a situation where Adams is still the one driving the boat? he's just looking for his feedback as he has in the past, and as we've seen from those blue and golds, those beyond blue and gold videos. And is Kekäläinen just another voice? And maybe Kekäläinen is able to say, no, this is a player where, yeah, you should be more aggressive, or this is a player you should be more careful with. And maybe that is where his influence is most valuable. But for him to be touted as this aggressive forward thinker in terms of how you build a team, to not be in a position to flex that muscle is where I'm a little bit like, okay, that's where I'm a little hesitant to see how it works, just because there's so many unknowns in how it's going to unfold.
Chris, we're being completely speculatory. Well, I am when I'm asking you this, and I know your answer would be you speculating because obviously you wouldn't know this for sure. But do you get a sense that when it comes to this edition and as it pertains to Kevyn Adams, do you think this is something that Adams sought out? Or do you think this is something that, Terry Pegula said, listen, we're adding another guy here. We know that Kevyn Adams, we've talked about this before. I don't think Kevyn Adams is going to really rock the boat with things that Terry wants to do. We've discussed that. Do you think this is a situation where this is a Terry call and Terry saying, well, this is what it's going to be? And Kevin's like, all right, well, we'll make it work as best we can. Or do you think that having a senior advisor, somebody with significantly more general manager experience, somebody that I'm sure Kevyn Adams is privy enough to know that people in the media and fans are going to start clamoring for to take his job really, really quick if the Sabres start out struggling? Do you think it's something that he openly, or I should say behind closed doors, endorsed to get a guy like this on staff? Or do you think it's one of those, listen, man, this is what it's going to be, so I got to, make the best of what this is going to be?
Yeah, I try to apply what I know about this, or what we generally know. And, Terry Pegula has long been hesitant to hire a president. He does not want a president, right? And so that would indicate that it's against, he's going against the grain a little bit if this was a hire that Pegula pushed for. And I also think that most GMs, if not all of them, wouldn't want to bring in a potential successor, especially if you've missed the playoffs for 5 years and you've regressed for the last couple. It'd be hard to say, hey, I'm going to bring this guy in who has only been out of the job for a year, and he did this job, the same job I do, for the last decade. So there's some competing points of view there for sure. If I think I'd have to lean towards this is something that Adams pitched to Pegula as a way to keep his job. And that's not to suggest that he was definitely getting fired or anything like that. Again, we're speculating. But if I had to guess, we heard that they had their meetings. Pegula had his meeting with Adams. Laura Pegula was there, as Matt Fairburn mentioned in his article. And if I had to guess, as he presented his vision for this offseason and how they're going to try to fix this thing, he said, hey, I think it'd be smart for us to bring in a couple more voices, because we do know that Adams likes to collaborate, right? He wants the voices to be heard. He wants everyone to have an opinion, who need to have one on a move or a pick or what have you. So I would take it to mean that Adams looked at it and said, hey, if we bring in a more senior voice, it can help us in navigating and crafting our strategy. It can give me someone to lean on too. And maybe that softened Pegula up to the idea of it. And maybe it could very well also be that Pegula was thinking like, hey, I'd like to have someone else there with you, because maybe one day you could be you can take over as president of the Sabres, so I don't have to do it. I can be president of the Bills or whatever. And then that guy can then take over as general manager. So, there's a lot of threads you can pull on, and there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down. If I had to guess, I would say Adams over Pegula. But that's just, that's my 2 cents on trying to read the tea leaves. But
let's take a quick break, come back on the other side. I want to spend a couple minutes talking about Matthew Fairburn's story that we've referenced a few times, a rebuttal of sorts kind of post that I got some opinions on, good and bad. And like I said, just the desperation mode, what might be ahead for the Buffalo Sabres here in the coming weeks. So we'll be right back, folks. All right, back here with Chris Ostrander, blogger, podcaster, buddy of mine, recurring guest now on this show. So Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic put out a very interesting feature article in The Athletic last week. And again, I had him on the show. If you're watching today, when you're done listening to this, if you didn't catch it, make sure you go back. I thought it was a really good show. Matthew's a really good writer, and he's a sneaky good interview too. I mean, he doesn't say outrageous things, but he's got a way of saying things that are really interesting without being flamboyant about it. Complete opposite of me, where I got to let you know every cool thing that I ever think I said. Anyway, but I want to get your thoughts on what you read. I likened it a little bit because it painted, no matter what perspective you have on it, I think we could all agree the article painted a pretty gloomy picture of the Buffalo Sabres organization, the operation, and discussing how Kevyn Adams came into power. He talks about, the salary cap, which a lot of, we kind of know about that, and just some decisions and some, quotes from sources, things like that. It reminded me a little bit of when Tyler Dunn had his Sean McDermott series. Not to that extent. I think the reaction with Tyler was a lot more polarizing. It was a lot more divided. There was a school of thought. There were some people out there that thought that Tyler was just attacking Sean McDermott. I don't think anybody is thinking that Fairburn was attacking Terry Bagula or Kevyn Adams. He was just painting a very negative picture of a franchise that's missed the playoffs 14 straight years. I mean, what the hell do you expect? Let's start here. Let me ask you this, actually. Again, playing this speculatory game. If you're Kevyn Adams, okay, and you sat down, by the way, Kevyn Adams sat down with him for a full hour for that story. But if you're Kevyn, if you're Terry, and I know Terry don't talk to the media, but I strongly suspect he still reads and keeps up with what's going on. What is your reaction if you're the Sabres organization when you see an article like that that's been talked about a lot of buzz with that article over the past week or so?
It's another one for the pile, that's for sure. They got a lot of bad press the last 3-4 months of the season. They couldn't escape it from that palm trees press conference basically to the end of the year.
Yeah,
they were in the news cycle a lot, and it was rarely, if ever, positive. And Matt mentions it in the article, right? I'll start to here. That was a very, very well sourced, well researched, fact based article.
Mm-hmm.
He really laid it out. It was not editorializing. It was not an opinion piece, which maybe is like, and I thought the Ty Dunn stories on McDermott were phenomenal.
Me too.
But that was a little bit more of a opinion analysis piece.
Yes.
Whereas this was a little bit, maybe leaned a little bit more on the pure reporting side.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to speak ill of Tyler's work by any means.
No. We're not doing that. I'm just saying, I was talking about the reaction. No,
right.
There was a lot of people
for sure.
who thought it was personal. And you're not wrong, by the way. That was more opinionated than this one. They're both think pieces, but in different ways.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, that's a good way to put it. And so, reading through it, if I'm the Sabres front office, in a way, I wonder if some of this not white noise, but if they're like, oh, here we go again. This one is interesting though, because to me, at least, you had like the quote from the Sabres employee saying, it's Bills. The Sabres get nothing. But I thought it was more notable that you had scouts on record all but saying, we don't like the way this guy got his job. He didn't grind out the miles on the road. He wasn't out here in Moose Jaw watching games. He got to run a hockey rink and a youth program, and now he's a GM. That was really telling to me. And I think that you had, I think it was the former scout who had the hamster wheel line, which is also notable to me. I think that, Adams comes in and it's possible that this guy, has a bit of a gripe against Adams, because if he was one of the guys that Adams fired when Botterill wouldn't, there could be some bad blood there. But for him to look at it and say, this guy reflecting on his time with the organization, to say, yeah, it's a hamster wheel. They can't get out of their own way. They just keep going around in circles. Look at how it's gone these last 15 years. That's exactly what it's been. Darcy Regier starts a rebuild. It gets handed off to Tim Murray. They draft Eichel. They draft Reinhart. They get O'Reilly. They make their moves to try to work their way out of their rebuild. That core does not work. that core is not good enough. They don't make the right moves around them, what have you. They start again. And Botterill is in the interim there, of course. He's kind of like rebuilding on the fly, if you will. But long story short, it turns into another rebuild. Kevyn Adams taking it over. He's stripping that core down, building it back up. And now here we are 5 years later. Not only have all those key players won Stanley Cups, but also they are going to be knocking on the door of a potential another reset if things go really sideways for them. So, the hamster wheel was very, very apt. And again, that to me was what really stood out to me as the most telling and informative pieces was the fact that you had scouts, and NHL personnel saying like, yeah, they're not doing things right. It's not going well for them. They can't get out of their own way. I thought that was really, really telling.
The shitty part about source-based reporting is you have to really trust the reporter that the sources that they're using are A, accurate, of course, and B, that it's not too personal against the organization. Like referencing back to Tyler's piece, a lot of those sources, it sure sounded like they had an axe to grind against Sean McDermott, and maybe for very good reason, by the way, okay? Same thing here on the Sabres side, we don't know. You got to trust the reporter and the sourcing that, again, that it's accurate. And even if it's harsh, that it could still be harsh, but also objective, which again, I completely trust Matthew Fairburn to do that job. Just like I completely trust Tyler Dunn on the football side. Let me ask you this. We're podcasters, content creators, we're hockey fans. You so more than me, but I am a hockey fan, not on your level, of course. I don't have knowledge of the game on your level either, but I enjoy the game. I watch it. I get emotional about it at times. I remember when the Sabres were really good, how much I loved hockey at that time. I remember growing up, my dad taking me to games, even though my dad hated hockey, but he knew I liked it, so he would take me to the games anyway. So I got a love affair with hockey to an extent, but I guess what I'm saying is this. At the end of the day, we're also human beings, you and I. And do you feel for Kevyn Adams on a personal human level that he is, now a lot of it is self-induced, like, some of his own comments, some of the actions and things like that. But I feel like he's I hate to say this word, but in a hockey way, a laughing stock among a lot of Sabres fans. You know what I mean? It's like just fumbling all over the place. And whether that's fair or not, I don't know. But do you feel on a human level, like, do you feel bad for him? Listen, how would you feel if you had your own social media person who said, "Happy birthday, Chris Ostrander," however you were, and then you'd be afraid to go into the mentions because of what's going to be said about you? You know what I mean? Your family's going to see that shit. It would be embarrassing on a human level. He seems by all accounts like a nice person. More on that in a few minutes, by the way. But you know what I mean? Do you kind of sympathize with him a little? I know it's part of the territory. We know that, but still, you sympathize with him a little bit on the human level?
Yeah, I do. And actually, I just wanted to say one thing very quickly, about Matt and his article. He had an article earlier this year in the spring, if I'm not mistaken, early spring, late winter. And he had like Brandon Montour on the record, and he had a couple of other people who were named sources. And I think that was really important for him laying that framework to be able to get a guy like Montour on the record and be like, yeah, this is what my time in Buffalo was like. I think that is really, really important if you're looking at this and asking questions of his sources. Because like not only has he gotten people on the record, but they've been willing to put their name to it. So I think that's really notable with respect to Matt's work. And on Adams, credit to him for sitting down with Matt. He could have said, "No, thanks, I'm not doing it."
Agreed.
He's facing the music. He obviously understands the role that he's in and that he's taken, and some of this does come with the territory, right? If you are, Aaron Rodgers goes on TV and makes an ass of himself twice a week, but he knows what he's doing, right? Like he's welcoming it. He wants to troll to a certain extent, right?
Sure.
And so I think, when you're a coach, you're a GM, like, you're going to have to put your feet in the fire. And so I'm sure at some level, Adams is understanding of it. He was a pro athlete. He played the highest level. There's things you got to grind through. You got to work through it, and you got to take it on the chin sometimes. With that being said, I remember when they hired Sean McDermott, here at some of his first interviews, I was like, man, like, I hope this is the guy who breaks it. not only because I wanted the drought to break, but I was like, I like the way he carried himself. I was like, seems like a cool dude. Like, it'd be cool for this is the guy who does it for him. And so I can apply that to Adams. You try to factor the human element into this,
Mhm.
right? He's out there working. He's doing the best he can. He took a job that he maybe wasn't qualified for, right? And so you gotta own that to a certain extent. But I try to give him the benefit of the doubt when I can. But it's getting harder. It's getting really hard.
That's an understatement, dude. That is an
it's getting really tricky.
understatement.
I'll say this to answer your
Go ahead.
question, though. At least as it pertains to the fan base, like, yeah, it's tough because some people just don't want to cut him any slack. They just, it's black and white, right? And so on that level, yeah, I'm like, oh, geez, like I wish this guy could something go right for him, not just because he could use the win, but because the Sabres need a win too. So.
Yeah, and imagine, again, are you going to take the job? Of course you're going to take the job, especially if you probably don't have other options. And like to your point, you're probably not qualified to take it. Of course you're going to take the job if it's presented to you. But imagine being the guy who gets the job just a couple of weeks after the guy who we thought was going to be safe. I think Kim Magula might have said a couple of weeks before that Botterill was going to be safe, and turns out he wasn't. So you get the job while the fan base is already angry at the team. And what was the streak at then? A point 8, 9, 10 years, something like that.
Yep.
And the first day, literally, congratulations, you're my new GM. Now go fire 20 people on day one. I mean, that was discussed in the article. I mean, that's not really a revelation. Most people anyway, who follow the Sabres, you knew about that. But what a tough gig. God damn, that's really got to suck, man. But to your point, it is a job, and you got to, if you don't do your job good, it's not going to be a good look for you. The one thing in the article that was pointed out that really got under my skin personally was the perception of that Kevin's trying to. Kevyn Adams is a yes guy, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. Maybe that's a reason. I don't know if that's the reason why he got the job. I think it might be the reason why he's kept it as long as he has. Plus, Terry just don't want to pay another guy to not be, in the organization. But
possible.
At some point, he talked about in the article, Matthew's article, about standing, I don't say standing up, but having tough conversations with Terry and saying where he thinks the team needs the most improvement. And I know he mentioned defense and special teams he mentioned, right? So he mentioned special teams as a big problem with this team. Well, it is, June 9th right now at lunch hour. Has there been a coaching change, assistant coaches, especially that I don't know about? Are the same special teams coaches, are the same assistants still here as we're recording this episode? So if you're going to the owner and saying, basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, our special team sucks, and that's a big reason why we're not a good hockey team right now. But you haven't made no changes. How am I supposed to respect that? I guess that's what I'm asking you.
No, it's a good question because, I've been waiting for something to happen too. And, the fact that they bring in their PR hire in Lindy Ruff last year, and I'm sorry, I can't get by it. Like, it's a PR hire. Like,
I agree.
That's how I read it. They bring him in. They don't let him name any coaches. They keep Wilford and Bales around. They bring Appert up as, probably the coach in waiting. And so for Adams to then go in this article and talk about special teams, among other things, like, buddy, these are your handpicked coaches. Your coach didn't even pick them. This is Adams' crew. Adams went to bat for these guys, and so that's a tough look. That's a real tough look for him to go on the record with that one. And there's still time. I think it was Chad maybe on one of his recent podcasts pointed out that it's not necessarily as pressing to get an assistant coach in April, May when you've been out of the playoffs. You're not playing in the playoffs. So there's a little bit of time for that, at least, in some respects. It's not perfect by any means, but that's a notable thing to point out. I appreciated Chan's point of view on that one. But it would sure be nice for them to, again, like, just, they talked about accountability 2 years ago, and the GM's still in his job. Like, they didn't let the new coach hire his own guys. Like, we can go around in circles with this stuff over and over again, but
we got our own hamster wheel of a podcast going once we start getting into.
It's just, it's the practicing what you're preaching, and a lot of times it doesn't feel like they are.
No. All right. So this story by Matthew prompted I guess we'll call it a response post from a guy for people who don't know. Name is Greg Canali, and he was the Sabres social media manager for a handful of years during this drought. He hasn't been with the team now for at least a few years. I believe it's like 2021 or something like that when he left. I'm
I
going
think
to
he
preface
says it
this
in the
by
article.
yeah. I'm gonna preface this by saying, Craig, by all accounts, I've ever had with him, is a really nice guy. I do remember him when he worked for the Sabres. I remember when he started following me on Twitter. I had some correspondence with him on the social media side. So again, by all accounts, a nice guy, somebody that I like. I got nothing against. And he wrote basically what was a rebuttal to Fairburn's piece, and it was titled like "Why This Time May Be Different for the Buffalo Sabres." There's a couple things I liked and a couple things I didn't like that I want to get your opinion on, because I know you've read it, and I saw that you had a take on the Twitter X machine a couple of days ago as well. All in all, I'll say this. I can respect, and you said this, actually, I think you said this on Twitter, almost word for word. I can respect his viewpoint as somebody who's kind of inside, like a former person who worked for the organization, and he's on the inside when he was there, to an extent, at least. I also will say this, too. Having a sunny, like, disposition about about a hockey team, even when that organization just stinks, maybe that's a welcome change. Like, maybe I kind of wish I could get myself to the point where I could be a little more optimistic and positive about the organization and say, hey, man, there are a couple things away and turning the corner is possible. I don't feel that way right now. So in that way, after reading the article, it actually makes me a little bit envious. And like I said, a little bit of kind of inside-ish of what it was like for the Sabres after Pegula bought the Bills, because Matthew highlighted in his article that sources, were talking about, it was all Bills all the time, and the Bills is what mattered, and the Sabres just didn't matter as much. Craig kind of refuted that. But again, I'll give him the respect as somebody who was at least there. You and I weren't there. Most 99.9% of fans who have read that media weren't there. He was. So I'll take it for his word at some of that stuff. So there were some things I did like about this, but with all due respect to Craig, and I'm being objective and honest about this, dude, Chris, he called Kevyn Adams while still being general manager. He's been general manager since June of 2020. He said it was a step towards stability. That's what he said with Kevyn Adams, and said that great leaders hold themselves accountable because, and he wrote this in the article, Craig wrote that Kevyn said, if I had to do it over again, I may have shook something up. That's what Kevyn Adams said in hindsight about the 13-game losing streak. I don't know, man. It's just, the long term is in mind. Isn't 14 years long enough? This felt, with all due respect, like a guy who still might be working for the Sabres secretly that I don't know about, that was writing an article for as many fans to see as possible. And I like Craig, and he's a talented dude. But this was, if you want to say Matt's was too critical, this was really way more optimistic than this organization deserves, right? That's how I feel.
Yeah, and I would challenge him on a few things. Like, it was very much a Pollyanna, pay no mind to the man behind the curtain, right? Like, everything's fine. Trust us. They're doing a great job. Just trust them. I took it as as I read it, like, I was like, is this, like, because someone shared it, and I was like, is this from when they hired Kevyn Adams? Not today. Like, it
right.
Yeah, like, it just read to me as something like that you would write when it was a regime change, not a GM who's been in the seat for 5 years. So that was like my biggest take, was like, well, it was like, oh, like, this is the tone of the article is that of a new GM, not one who's drawn criticism from, I mean, geez, like every corner of the fan base at this point.
Yes.
So I thought it was a little bit too much of a head in the sand take on the overall state of the organization.
Mhm.
And yeah, I said on Twitter, like, like on the Bills take, like, that's helpful insight, quite frankly, because I mean, I've always maintained, like, I think he likes the Sabres better. but I'm sure he likes the money he makes with the Bills better.
Hmm.
But you got a person sourced in Matt's article saying that it was all Bills all the time. Craig saying otherwise. I mean, I think again, it's helpful insight. Craig, like you said, Craig was there. Like you got to take him at his word on that one. So, um,
Yes.
like I think that's really helpful. I think it's important that you get someone on their side, if you will, to say like, no, like they kept their attention on the Sabres as well. It does go in the flies in the face. I think of a lot of, again, from the fan base perspective, probably goes in the opposite view of a lot of people. That's one of, I kind of wonder, like, if you took this to 100 people and you had them read those quotes, Craig's view and then the view from Matt's article, which way are people going to lean? I'd have to think people are going to lean towards Matt's, like the quote in Matt's article, less so than Craig's. But um, that's again,
They're
I
hockey people. They're GM or
right.
they're scouts. They're
Well,
the
I'm just talking
pe-
fans. Like, just pick 100 people in Buffalo.
yeah.
I would have
Oh,
to think people would probably lean to say, like, no, I think the Bills get more attention than the Sabres. I mean, he goes every Bills game. He's rarely at Sabres games, right? Like, there's
right.
some evidence to the contrary. But no, I'm kind of going contrary to what I just said. But no, I think his viewpoint on that is valuable, and should be noted. But where I would challenge him, like I said, is a, like, just the framing of it being that this is, you're talking about a GM. He is the, I wrote it before we jumped on. I had actually done a little research for myself. Adams is the 10th most tenured GM in the NHL right now,
That's
and
crazy.
right, and Ruff is already the 15th longest tenured coach. Like you're talking about a league where the shelf life on these guys is 2 years at best in some cases. So Adams has already defied logic with how long he's been in his job, and Ruff, I think there's 9 new coaches, if I'm not mistaken, behind him. So it's again, I think you missing the mark on that in that respect. Um, and just overall, if he's, you mentioned, as you said, like, if this is a rebuttal to Matt's article, Matt had the sourced fact based article, and Craig's is very much just like kind of a vibe, like, this is
Yeah.
my vibe, right? And so there's not a lot of in the way of factual analysis. I would also challenge him, like, just as he's talking about Lindy Ruff, talking really glowingly about how Ruff operates as a coach, and all these nice things about Ruff. And Lindy Ruff hasn't been out of the second round since 2006, 2007. And that was with one of the best rosters in the NHL. That Sabre, they were the President's Trophy winners. That's the
Yeah.
last time Lindy Ruff got to a conference final, was 06, 07. And so I think that's really telling. This idea that he does more with less, I think is long past overdue. I think we can retire that take. And the Adams stuff, I don't know. Like, if you're still a fan of Kevyn Adams, then that's all fine and good. I don't think we need to be reminded that Kevyn Adams is from Clarence. That's it's like Ryan Fitzpatrick went to Harvard territory at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
I would just go back again to the tenure. He's been in the seat for 5 years. They were 1 point off the playoffs 3 years ago, and if there was any time for them to hit the gas, that was it, right? And even last offseason, he said, no, like, the time is now, win now mode, whatever. And Craig's talking in his article about how, they'll spend when they need to spend.
Yeah. Chill.
Right.
Be patient. Let's
Yeah.
be patient. The time will come. The time will
Right.
come.
And
Yes. Yes.
the time was 22-23. The summer after you're 1 point off the playoffs.
100%.
Like, that's when you're like, oh, this core's got it, right? Like, this
Mhm.
core that I built, you're Kevyn Adams, you're in his shoes. Like, Tage is hitting, Darlene's great, Power's playing well. If we get some goaltending, we're in the playoffs. Like, that's the time to go. And instead, they made next to no changes.
Yeah.
And the one change, I think the one most notable change that offseason going into the 23-24 season was Zach Benson making the team over, in place of, I should say, Jack Quinn, because he was hurt. And if I'm not mistaken, just recently someone, like, kind of had a hot take on Benson, like, that it was, like, kind of off-putting to the players that he was the one taking that spot, that they didn't have a more seasoned veteran to go in there. So those are the 3 big things I would challenge Craig on, is, like, the Lindy Ruff and Adams just take in general, the vibe and tone of the article, and then the idea that, like, they'll spend when they're ready. mean, they've been ready for 3 years, if not longer.
There's, there's no question about that.
Right.
And again, I will say, I can also respect and understand, with so much negative feelings about the team, which I will die in the hill. It's very deserved. But regardless, painting a positive picture for people who choose to be optimistic, that's fine. That's cool, man. I could respect that. I truly, truly do. Where I guess I take the single most issue, referencing your vibe point here, is this. All right. When you're in the media, okay, and say you cover, like, not one team, but say you cover just sports, generally speaking, a rule of thumb is you don't cover high school sports the same way that you would cover a professional team. Like, we'll use Clarence. They got a high school hockey team. I'm assuming they do. If you're a beat reporter, if you're working for the Buffalo News and you're covering high school hockey, you're not going to cover it the way you cover the NHL. There's a standard, and there's just, like Jonah Bronstein. Jonah Bronstein is a great writer, man. He covers a lot of high school shit. He covers the Sabres as well at Channel 4. He does everything, man. He does not cover high school sports the same way. There's kitty gloves in high school. There's a rule. If Chris Ostrander, the goalie, is playing like shit for Clarence High School, I'm not going to be writing that Chris Ostrander, a 16-year-old junior, is playing like shit. You just don't do that in high school. You find, he's struggling to find his way a little. You get what I'm saying. There's kitty gloves that you treat a certain level of sports. It ain't that way in the NHL. And I'm very happy for Craig on a personal and professional, what he's doing with his life. But to have in his article, Kevin, sent him a personalized message in an email when Craig announced that he was leaving, and speaking to the quality of the person. That's cool, but ain't nobody, we talked about this earlier, nobody is questioning whether Kevyn Adams is a good guy or not. I don't think anybody is. I don't think any Sabres fan is saying, well, I don't like Kevyn Adams because he's a dickhead. You know what I mean? It's purely hockey reasons why people don't like Kevyn Adams. So that's pointless to me to talk about him being a good person. I don't care. This is not high school. This is the NHL. Give me production. That matters. And then you said it perfectly too. He said this, when the pieces are in place and the time is right, they will invest more money. Throwing money around for the sake of throwing money around is not ideal. And to your point, they almost made the playoffs a couple years ago. If that was, and you're in a drought, 10, 11 years into a drought, when the hell is going to be the time?
Right.
So, yeah, man, it's a kind of a mixed bag. I respect him having a voice from somebody who was in the organization, and I respect the optimism, but there's just some things in there that just sound way too cherry for me, for my liking. It's not warranted with this organization. You got to go on, you got to prove it. We've been hearing shit for years now, and I don't care that Kevyn Adams is a good dude. I don't care that Terry Bagula and Kim have Christian values in the organization. Nobody gives a shit. Go out there and win hockey games. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Which kind of leads to the last topic I wanted to talk about here. The Sabres are in complete desperation mode at this point. They got to activate desperation mode. Staying the course with just these little subtle, moderate changes ain't going to get it done. What do you think this offseason? It could start as now, a couple weeks from now, July 1st, whenever. What does the season entail for you? What needs to be done right now to say, you know what? I don't necessarily want to say all in, but again, desperation mode where you got to do something to get better. And I like adding an advisor. I like Eric Stahl as someone who's going to be chirping at players. That's fine. But that's not desperation mode to me. It's just adding 2 more people into the front office or whatever. What's desperation mode to you? What does this team need to do, Chris, where you're going to go into October feeling like, all right, man, this is not going to hit 15. This ends now. What do they got to do?
Yeah, and not to run totally contrary to Craig's optimism. It's hard to be optimistic that they're going to be all in. When a year ago, Kevyn Adams was on the lectern saying the time is now, it's a win now mode, and all that good stuff. I know someone tweeted the Jeff Merrick radio hit from it was last year Friday or last year Thursday, where he was like, if they don't make the playoffs, it's going to be a bloodletting. This is the season, the off season that the Sabres have to get it right. And here we are a year later having the same conversation. So forgive me if I'm questioning whether or not they will indeed be all in. Bowen Byram is going to be gone, right? That writing's on the wall. I think if they were really all in, they would trade that 9th pick, and that might just mean trading it with Bowen Byram. We'll see. They would trade probably at least one of their top prospects, so an Ostlund, a Hellenius. I don't know if Roseanne counts anymore, but you can put him in the mix because he's a first rounder. Even put Kulik in that mix if you really want to. You're going to trade an A prospect. You're going to trade your first round pick. You're moving Byram. You're probably trying to move, going back to the top of the show, maybe you're trying to move Peterka because you want to try to get an upgrade. So, an all-in summer to me would be like two really, really notable acquisitions, probably one at forward, one on D. And I'm talking like a top 6, top line forward, a top pair defenseman. That's like an EA Sports offseason. But if you're talking again, you're talking all in. If you're desperate, that's probably what you're looking at. Maybe they're able to move the money to go chase Mitch Marner. Maybe he's one of those acquisitions, right? That would be another sign that they're really, really serious about trying to get this drought broken, to get themselves into the contenders in the league. What I would probably lean towards would be a less explosive offseason, but I think Byram moves. I am very hopeful that they would strongly consider trading that 9th pick. I think it does more for them on the ice now and in the future. I think they can have some long-term outlook on it if they trade that for someone. And then I would be, again, hopeful that they would try to find a way to dump the cap from Clifton, Lafferty. I would love to see Samuelsson gone, but I know there's been some reporting to the contrary that he's probably safe. So we'll see how that works out. Because if you're putting me in the chair, Samuelsson and Clifton, I want to get those contracts off my books and reinvest their money. But even just starting smaller, Clifton and Lafferty clears you $5 million. That's not insignificant. And if you use Byram the right way, you can get some help. And we'll see if they move if they try to do a like for like, kind of move Byram for a right-handed D. If they try to move Byram for more assets to trade, who knows? I've heard some different takes on it. Chris Baker had a take of, can you move Byram in 9 to get to 2 with San Jose? That'd be really exciting, and I'd be okay with them picking second. That'd be pretty cool. That'd be pretty cool. But do they trade Byram for help elsewhere? In terms of trying to get like a player that they can plug in, and maybe they get a prospect, or maybe they get a pick that they can use again in another trade. So my expectation for them is certainly lower than what you might qualify as a figurative all-in summer. But I do think that there's no more room. Kekäläinen's here. You're on the last years of your contract. You were a laughing stock from December on as the general manager. You've got nothing else to lose at this point. Why not make moves that are going to be someone else's problem?
Yeah.
It doesn't help us as fans, but at least from a general manager perspective, put your chip. You got to play. You got to play a hand here. So, that's that. I'm still in wait and see mode to see when this starts coming. I think I would be shocked if Byram's not the first chip to fall. But remains to be seen. But
I was going to say, if I could put on my Craig cap right now with some optimism, you just mentioned it. Kevyn Adams knows. He's got to know. It's now or never for him. It's now or never. And it's not even about getting fired anymore. It's you're not going to have a contract. You know what I mean? So he doesn't even have to get fired. If they miss the playoffs this year, he's gone. This is his last year of his contract, right?
I believe
so. It's not even a firing. It's just, you're not getting another contract, man. So he's got to earn a contract, and he knows that. To your point, there's no more leeway. Last thing I wanted to add, are we looking at potentially, at least, because I think this is something that could help this hockey team. I have no earthly idea who, but what about a goaltender? Whether it's a trade, whether it's, I don't know if there are free agents out there, but I do feel like UPL was not great this past season. He was certainly inconsistent. James Reimer is 87 years old. I don't know that he's playing anymore, and I don't know that I want him back in Buffalo. And I don't know that Devin Levi's ready to be a Buffalo Sabre you could count on to play 30 to 45 games this coming season. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I don't know. But do you feel like maybe trying to make some kind of significant move for a goalie who could probably steal you a handful of games, which had never seemed to happen barely with the Sabres? Not much anyway. Do you feel like that's on the table here?
Yeah, that's if I'm putting on my optimist cap, it's like all the things are going to congeal. You're going to have a goalie go on a heater like UPL did 2 years ago. You're going to get the shooting percentage bump that they got kind of this year too, but that 22-23 year where they shot the lights out. That's your hope, right? And it would certainly help that if you had someone reliable with Luukkonen. I've been on record saying that I don't think Levi should be in the NHL next year. I would give him another year. I think that is much more healthier for his development. And the UFA class is thin. Jake Allen is a pretty decent target. He's been a pretty solid veteran backup, even a 1B the last handful of years.
Mm-hmm.
I think Alex Lyon is an interesting player to look at if they can't get Allen. Alex Lyon famously kept the Florida Panthers alive in that 22-23 season and helped them, and it was really the reason they made the playoffs. That 2-1 game the Sabres lost, he was in net. He would be another very adequate target to back up Luukkonen, to play in tandem with Luukkonen. Beyond that, you start to get into some dodgy territory in this free agency class. I think Dave Rittich is a decent target. He's a big guy. He was just out in LA. He'd be another guy worth talking to. And then after that, you're looking at trades. And there's just that's where you start to throw darts, and you can start getting in trouble. Looking at you, Eric Comrie, looking at you, Carter Hutton. And I was a Comrie fan. I thought he was going to be a really good acquisition. He wasn't. So I got to own that one. Laurent Brossoit, he's out in Chicago. I know that Chris Baker, I believe, mentioned him once too. He was out all year. He had a bad knee injury. He had like 2 surgeries, so he didn't play all of last year. But he's been a steady backup in this league, and he would probably be really cheap because Chicago went and got Spencer Knight at the deadline. They have Arvid Soderblom, who they signed as a free agent a couple years ago, and they also have a young up-and-coming goalie in Drew Comesso. So Brossoit has like nowhere to go there. And so they could probably get him as a throw-in to a trade. And so he'd be another guy to consider looking at. He's been decent enough. He gave Vegas some good games a couple years ago. He's always been good in Winnipeg. That might be a system thing. But he'd be another name that I would throw out there. Not the sexiest name by any means, but he at least gives you a little stability. And he's not 37, 38 like Reimer is. So
it's going to be interesting. I feel like I always say that it's going to be interesting, but we're getting close now.
You know what? Even if they don't do anything, it's still worth talking about.
Oh,
if
100%.
they sit on their hands again, it's going to be like they're going to be pitchforks in front of the arena. But but that's still fascinating. If they honestly think, team, I got one more in me, looks at this and says, we're going to run this thing back. Like, that's crazy, but it's fascinating. And it's going to make for some good podcast fodder. That's for sure.
It definitely is. I'll tell you, I don't know the prospects, but I am looking forward to the draft. Just between, do the Sabres pick at 9? Do they trade that pick like you said? Are there other trades, with involving the Sabres, of course? Just lots of things coming up. And you're right. Whether they do something, if they do something, we're going to have a lot to talk about. If they don't do anything or, just the same old moderate shit, we're going to have plenty of shit to talk about too as well. So it's going to be interesting, certainly, in that aspect. All right, guys, make sure you follow Chris on Twitter at 2ITB_Buffalo. I'll put a link to that and his blog and all that stuff too in the show notes. Appreciate you, man. This was good stuff, dude.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, and I will be back. All right, so this was all Sabres today. Tomorrow, back to football. Matt Moore from SB Nation joins me. Talk to you guys then.